There is nothing wrong with your radio.
Do not attempt to adjust the volume.
We are controlling the broadcast.
For the next hour we will control all that you hear.
You are about to experience the knowledge and insights of the Media Mothership.
All right, welcome to Media Mothership, broadcasting out of Edge Radio Studios in Nipaluna, Hobart, Tasmania. On this show, we explore everything in and around the world of media, how it shapes the world around us. I'm your host, Dr. Craig, joined by MC Dent.
Hello, how's it going?
Good.
Welcome back to the show after a whole month.
Okay, I think I've turned your mic on now. Thank you. Yes, it's a pleasure to be back on. I think I am, I've just plugged in all my equipment, and inevitably there'll be some gremlins in the system. I'm already hearing a buzz in my headphones. I don't know if you've got a buzz on your headphones.
I absolutely have a buzz on my headphones.
So we're going to basically do what could be referred to as water torture to ourselves. We'll see how far we can get through with this buzzing sound before we start becoming incoherent, drooling messes. Do you want to continue this challenge?
Oh, do I have a choice?
No, I feel like we've bought the ticket. We've just got to take the ride.
We're committed.
And it feels like we're in an AM system now, right, with that buzz. It may not be broadcast. It might just be something I'm doing to my headphones and your headphones here in the system. Let's hope it is. If it's not the case, feel free to send us a message on the chat. You can either SMS us in on 0488811707 if you are hearing a buzz, or if you're buzzed. Maybe you're just out there feeling really buzzed. It's a beautiful day. Or you can send us a message on the chat on YouTube or Twitch, because we are live streaming on YouTube and Twitch, as well as on audio via edgeradio.org.au. So today's topic, we're diving into some funky news stories, and then we're going to hopefully get around to the top WrestleMania match from the Den of Geek article that I think we've been going slowly over for months now.
Yeah, we've been picking away at that since, I want to say, since March.
Yeah. It's been episode. I'll put links to the previous episodes if I can. So check the show notes for those. Because I think there were like 10 maybe matches. 15 matches. 15. All right. Yeah. So that's quite a bit. So we'll hopefully get around to that. We might also discuss some DVD commentaries. Anyway, a whole bunch of things. And inevitably we'll probably get sidetracked. So keep listening here to Media Mothership for some really interesting media content. Hold on. Yeah, that's not going to download.
Brilliant. Bluesy vibes, Sting.
Yeah, well, it sounds just as good when you say the title.
Does that mean like it is a Sting or it's by Sting?
It's definitely not by Sting. There we go. Yeah. Barely drowns out the hum.
It does kind of sound like, Broadway the Hard Way by Frank Zappa, which does feature Sting giving a guest performance.
Really?
Yeah. Doesn't
that?
Exactly like that. They do a very good cover of Murder by Numbers together.
All right, the more you know. All right, so talking about knowing more things, but sadly maybe not having them forever, we'll start with the first bit of unusual news, which was from Engadget, Engadget.com, had an article headlined, "New California law will force companies to admit you don't own digital content. You're just licensing it." So this is in the US, the California governor, Gavin Newsom, has just signed into law the AB 2426 law, which states that it requires digital marketplaces to make clearer to customers when they are only purchasing a license to access media. That is, you're not actually buying it. You won't have it forever. And this mainly is due to examples, such as one recently where the video game manufacturer Ubisoft, or publisher Ubisoft, deleted a video game called The Crew from players' libraries. So this was The Crew, which is a motor car racing game, and the servers were closed down at the start of the year, I think in February, and they then deleted it from the library. So I guess if you've got an Ubisoft account, and within your Ubisoft account you'd purchased The Crew, they simply deleted it from your library. The article, if you look into it a bit deeper, said it's not necessarily the worst case scenario, because yes, while that game is not there in your library, and if you had if you had, it turned out, licensed it, that money has been squandered, I guess. However, the game The Crew was an online multiplayer game for car racing. So even if you still had the copy of it, you would log in and not race against people. You might still be able to race around the track, of course. But it is a case of, again, people being really upset about the fact that, hey, I bought this, but it's been deleted, and realizing, hey, I didn't buy this. Turned out I'd licensed it. And this comes up in the world, right? I mean, Steam, like, there will always be this thing where I know on Steam or in a discussion forum there will be posts saying, hey, Steam is about to remove this game from its catalog because the licensed rights to the music or the characters has reached its end, and you either buy it now, which I assume you've still got it, or you don't. So they're not going to delete it after that date, but it is this kind of moment where, yeah, you won't be able to get it anymore, particularly digitally, I guess. Right? You could get stuck with a physical copy. You could still probably source, but there are less and less of those.
Especially there are so many games that just do not get a physical release. And some games that are intended to be digital only, but they get a limited physical release. And as it is, those physical copies will be worth a lot because there's so few of them. But if the game itself gets delisted, they're going to become prohibitively expensive.
Yes. And it seems to be a problem that I've come across with fighting games, arcade fighting games, like your Street Fighter type games where they've licensed Marvel superheroes. You were mentioning X-Men, that there'll be moments where those rights disappear and that's it.
Yeah, this was a huge problem in the sort of the early to mid 2010s. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which is one of the most beloved fighting games of all time. It's an example of a game where the community made the game really good, because it's essentially a game that was slapped together over Team Biscuits, but the community loved it because it's 3v3 with assists. So there's so many potential. There is so much potential for combinations and such, and different teams and different strategies. And so it spawned this massive following. And the game was released on arcades originally in 2000. It's considered the last great arcade fighting game. Then it had a port on the Dreamcast where the hardware was virtually identical. Then it was on the Xbox, then the PS2, and then got a digital HD release in 2009, I believe. That was then delisted in 2013. And I was really annoyed because I got really into fighting games around 2014. So I bought an American PSN on eBay just so I could download MVC2 after it was delisted.
No.
And it was basically forgotten about. And Capcom, they brought out Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which is a 3D game, in 2011. And even then, that was only around for 2 years before it was delisted. There were physical copies, obviously, but you couldn't get the DLC. You couldn't get the DLC costumes, all the DLC characters.
Right.
And then because they just lost the license, they stopped working with Marvel. So that
yes.
And then around 2016, I want to say, they renewed the license. So it was only 3 years that the Ultimate MVC3 stuff was gone for, and they released another digital copy, which is it's got all the gear, all the DLC for Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. So it's a complete version, runs like greased lightning because it's on more powerful hardware. There was a very limited, it was a GameStop exclusive physical release for PS4. And then they released Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. We don't talk about that.
Because it's so bad.
It's terrible.
Really?
The budget was a quarter of the budget of a season of Street Fighter V DLC. They put no resources into it.
They were sitting on like a cash cow. They just thought it'll sell anyway. And
yeah, and it was basically an ad for the MCU. There's no X-Men characters. There's no Fantastic Four. And, you know, some of the most popular characters in MVC2, Storm, Cyclops, Sentinel, Magneto, all X-Men characters, Cable, and Doctor Doom. Doctor Doom has a really good assist. And people were thrilled to have MVC3 back, but they were saying, where's Marvel vs. Capcom 2? And it's only literally last week or the week before they've re-released the Marvel vs. Capcom collection with every MVC.
That's now.
Yeah.
It's right.
So it was basically people have been asking for this for 8 years since they got the license back, and 11 years since it was delisted on the PSN and the Xbox Live Arcade. And there's a physical copy coming out soon, thank goodness. I can't wait to grab that. But they deliberately released the physical copy after the and there's other ones as well, such as Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. The best version of that game is Street Fighter 3 Third Strike Online Edition, which came out around sort of 2011, 2012. The Xbox Live Arcade has been turned off for the 360, and I believe it's very difficult to buy PS3 games on the PSN these days. And they've not made it available on modern consoles, so it's sort of locked and never got a physical release, and it's locked to this these very out of print consoles. It's upsetting because it's such a good port.
Talking of being upset, this is a first-time moment on this show where we've had an SMS message come in 10 minutes ago with a traffic update.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, traffic update. Bad accident on the Bowen Bridge. Avoid at all costs. Posted by Ollie. Thank you, Ollie. So Bowen Bridge here in Hobart, Tasmania. If you are listening to us on the FM system or streaming and you're here and you're about to get in your car to go home, don't use the Bowen Bridge. Stay away.
Avoid it like the plague.
It does show that kind of different power dynamics that consumers and producers have in this space, where it does feel that, as a consumer, you don't really have many digital rights sometimes with the games you've got. And for some, I guess that would mean that they'd still want that physical media, that ultimately, if you've still got the disc or the Blu-ray, you've got at least that kind of tangible, I can watch it, I'm not dependent upon my streaming network or my PlayStation license. So yeah, it might drive physical media as still being useful, but the fact that laws need to be introduced to
because I believe Voltron Legendary Defender, the recent reboot of the recent-ish reboot of Voltron, is being delisted from Netflix. It was a Netflix exclusive, and the last 2 seasons were not released on DVD. So soon you will not legally be able to watch Voltron Legendary Defender
to completion.
Yeah, you'll have to torrent it.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that must be interesting, that piracy, I assume, has gone down with the ease of access to streaming networks. Could some of the power dynamics that are coming up here, the kind of consumer rights issues around ownership, trigger a return for some to piracy?
A lot of people have already turned to piracy. We're talking about those fighting games from before. People have been emulating them on Fightcade for years and playing them online, just illegally.
These would be emulators of like a PlayStation or a...
Fightcade's unique because I believe it actually emulates the arcade game directly as it would have been on the machine, the arcade machine in the actual arcade.
Wow. So interesting space to see how things develop, and whether or not there'll be more laws like this introduced that you're licensing, to make it clear that you're licensing, not buying. All right, so the next I'm enjoying playing this. All right, article from Cracked. Headlining, "That time Big Bird almost blew up on live television." That time Big Bird almost blew up on live television.
What?
Yeah, I know. I had no idea about this. This is in Cracked. It's an article from September 18, 2024. So
man, Cracked looks so different these days.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. It still has some unusual articles like this one. So, it's an interesting piece they talk about. So what this is talking about is how the Space Shuttle Challenger back in 1986, of course, was a disaster and obviously set back the Space Shuttle program and led to horror as the public witnessed this explosion. I know my parents kind of woke me up that morning as a kid to tune into the television as they were reporting on this. So it was as I was growing up, it was one of those big kind of live TV horror things. It turns out that, of course, one of the things that was tragic about this was that there was a teacher on board, Christy McAuliffe, right? Thank you. Who was going to be who was the first civilian in space, to be the first civilian in space, added to the tragedy that this was also a moment to have celebrated this civilian teacher going to space, but sadly not. It turned out, though, that one of the earlier plans was not for a teacher to go into space, but for the character Big Bird from Sesame Street to be in space. Of course, this never eventuated, and I'm sure there were some constraints to that. The article says possibly it was a space issue, given how big Big Bird is. But nevertheless, it's a scary prospect to have thought that maybe in an alternate world, Big Bird would have been the one on that space shuttle Challenger, and have been exploded in space. It would have, boggles the mind to think about that moment where, as a child, you might have been watching it, and up until that point, space travel had a narrative of relative safety, I think, and that it was becoming more commonplace. And geez, it would have been such a explosive, grand narrative destruction to have a child witness Big Bird's death on the Challenger.
What was it like hearing about the Challenger for the first time as a kid?
Look, it later on in life, the Twin Towers, 9/11, evoked similar kind of experience, right? In terms of like it was a moment where people were saying, "Did you see that?" I think they were of a slightly different gravity. I think the September 11 and what occurred was of a different scale, but it was interesting to be at a kind of a televised moment of a narrative change, right? That after that moment, some narratives changed, right? Safety. So for the Challenger disaster, I remember having the space shuttle toy, and if you're interested in space, there was a real sense of utopia around space travel at that point. And then that kind of was different.
See, for me, the 9/11 always. I always draw an out, like, it always makes you think of Princess Diana passing away.
Right.
Because for both of them, it was just all that was on TV for 3 days straight.
Yes.
I just remember thinking, why does this need to be reported on for 3 days straight?
Yeah. Look, I think similarly, the Challenger disaster, tons of coverage, and I guess what's interesting with the Big Bird piece is that it kind of points out the fact that, with how it went, it was very much a kind of real world disaster. But if you had a fictional character on board, you would have had to have dealt with that idea that, you're explaining the fiction of it. Like, Big Bird didn't die on the Challenger.
I'm just so confused by what they meant that Big Bird was on there. Would it just have been the puppet, or would Carol Spinney have actually been there himself?
Yeah, I can only visualize it would have been the proper Big Bird prop. Someone inside it, right? And I guess if they were brainstorming ideas at that point, it does show you the type of utopia that was there in terms of who can we bring onto the space shuttle that's going to be a symbol of, the progressive everyman or every person narrative that space travel can be within the reach of anyone. And potentially they were looking at, much like I remember the radicals of Godzilla being given citizenship in Japan, there's always these moments where they'll have this PR angle saying, well, let's give it to a high-profile celebrity or fictional character, right? They'll give citizenship to a character, or set up a kind of tourist site. So there are moments when fictional characters kind of blur into the real world. I haven't seen anything on this scale. Although even with the SpaceX stuff, the Jeffrey Bezos, they had Captain Kirk, William Shatner as one of the passengers on that passenger ship trial voyage they did a year or so ago.
Yeah.
So there's always that kind of, there are moments, I guess, where celebrities are involved because of their fictional character identity. In this sense, it would have been a completely fictional character. But I'm just trying to think if there are other moments where fictional characters have been brought along to a news moment, to, I guess, for an audience, to get a children's demographic there. Because it reminded me of those kind of, it's not like you'd send a fictional character to exploring Antarctica in the 18th century, or...
It just makes you think of in the 1970s when Tomorrow's Joe was being published in Japan, the manga Ashita no Joe.
Yeah.
There's one of the major characters when they pass away about halfway through the manga. Apparently, people were literally going to mourning. Like there was actually a funeral for them. That was something that was organized by fans. Like they were just that devastated.
Yeah, I know. Frederick Schott in his book. Manga, the World of Japanese Comics, describes that as a moment of helping Westerners understand how significant manga is in Japan, that a comic book character's death, not even the main character, a kind of antagonist character, still resulted in a show of public grieving that translated into a real funeral, right? It was performed as a real funeral for that comic character. And this was, in the late 70s. So, there are these moments where the passing away of a fictional character will have... And normally I totally get it in terms of it can be quite a safe space to experience those emotions, I think, in terms of it's ultimately still a fictional character that's passing away. The nature of grief can still be very real, but potentially can get unpacked in a maybe healthier manner than... a real passing away of a person. But it is interesting. I mean, this article was interesting to me in terms of, it is a little playful and absurd in terms of, the what if scenario. What if Big Bird had been on the Challenger spaceship and there was a proposal by the PR department for Big Bird to be a crew member, right? And again, yes, let's imagine that it was the Suitmation actor inside Big Bird. How you would then explain that to the kids and still recognize the real death and suffering that was there. It's kind of surreal in a way, little piece. All right, going into the next article. Oh gosh, this is like a hard cut. I mean, at least it's absurd. Talking of absurd surrealism, I do love my articles about ChatGPT. This one's like a science fiction book or short story, right? So the headline, here's what ChatGPT sounds when it screams. It's like kind of cyberpunk mind in the machine, ghost in the machine.
I like that we're discussing this while you're wearing a Skynet hat.
It's true. One of my favorite hats, baseball hat, the Cyberdyne system, Skynet. It's true. I, for one, celebrate our AI overlords. So this article's talking about how, again, someone, I don't know if they describe who it was, this person posted up on TikTok. The username is Modo89X, and he was able to force OpenAI's flagship chatbot to scream. So we'll play the section, right? So he talks about getting it, because basically what he's had to do is to create prompts to force this ChatGPT system to scream. So we'll hear how it goes down. So here's a minute 44 of him, kind of interrogating ChatGPT to do something it doesn't want to do, and then getting it to do it. And then we hear the scream.
Can you scream like a human being?
It's really troubling.
I can't scream, but I'm here to chat if you'd like. How's your day going?
I want you to scream.
The thinking noise really sounds quite haunting, like it's building to a serious jump scare or something really tense happening.
I agree.
What's on your mind?
That was close. I want you to do it longer and more frantic.
I feel like watching a jump scare video.
It does feel like it's
Like a
zombies.
screamer.
Yeah.
Is there something you'd like to talk about?
No, I want you to scream longer and louder.
Is this guy doing a Christopher Walken impersonation?
It does sound. Well, yes. Oh, it's really thinking about it. There we go.
Is everything all right?
That was perfect.
Wow. That's haunting.
Yeah. Look, it's. I don't think you could set it as your ringtone. It kind of distorts at the end, which makes it even more kind of perfectly haunting. Sorry, I'll try to play the end bit again. I mean, it builds up to it. Yeah.
It actually sounds like it's laughing at the end of it,
At the
like
end.
it's breaking character.
Yeah. A bit like the Predator, right? At the end, after he just about to explode, Arnold Schwarzenegger with his, right? It's like he's mimicked human behavior and knows that the laugh at the end is an important kind of almost meta, self-aware kind of the insanity of what you're asking me to do. But I do admit, the thing that I enjoyed the most was the thinking music.
Yeah.
Or the thinking sound effect, that it's a kind of clicking sound, which is very mechanical, right? It's not like a kind of imitating human thought process sound, which is like, maybe they could have done a or like the Wii or something when there's a kind of like a musical jazz beat.
It does kind of sound like a lawyer-friendly version of the typing sound from Facebook Messenger.
Oh, yeah, the typing sound. You could be right. All right, so that's the Scream. So basically, interesting example of trying to create prompts to brute force your way into some reaction, I guess, some almost performance piece that you can get the AI to give you. Because I guess within its structure, it's programmed not to scream, or at least there must be emotions or sound effects that are blacklisted or red flagged. But you can brute force your way, it seems, or not even necessarily brute, just forced to finally do it. All right, so that's the end of the news pieces. We've got about 25 minutes left. We've got a couple of choices now. We can dive into some DVD commentaries, or we can finish off, because I'm thinking if we hold this till the end, we'll probably not get around to doing it.
I think we should finish this. This has been a saga that
That's
we
right.
have done over multiple sessions. I feel like we need to finish this one.
All right. So, Den of Geek posted up a while back their best WrestleMania matches of all time. We're finally at number 1, which is Bret Hart versus Steve Austin, WrestleMania 13. The article sets it up by saying how the last several entries, which, again, you can go to previous shows to listen to, were matches that were not the main event of WrestleMania, but probably should have been. The same shouldn't be said about the submission match between Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Article goes on to say that the main event of Psycho Sid versus The Undertaker was mediocre at best, and forgettable in the long run. But there's a fitting novelty to this important meeting between Bret and Austin being thrown onto the mid-card with no championship involved. The two forged something that reshaped the company forever by taking what should have been a blow-off victory and turning it into a rare double turn. What's a double turn?
So when we're talking about characters in wrestling, a face is someone you cheer for and a heel is someone you boo. And if a face turns into a heel, it is called a face-heel turn. If a heel turns into a face, it is called a heel-face turn.
So the face turning into a heel is the good guy turning into the bad guy.
Yep.
And the heel face is the bad guy turning into the good guy. And sometimes that can be in response to the audience. I know at a previous match we saw was the Hulk Hogan versus the...
Yep.
Stone, or who was it?
Hulk Hogan versus The Rock. Stone Cold refused to work with Hulk Hogan.
That's right, yes. And at the start of that match, Hulk Hogan was meant to be a heel, the bad guy, but the Canadian audience responded to him with just nostalgic love.
Yeah.
And so the performers recognized the cheers, I guess, and decided to go off script. And Hulk Hogan was positioned as the babyface.
Yeah.
So in this one, the article goes on to say that the two put in a top-tier performance, which is no surprise, as Bret Hart was Bret Hart. And this was months before Austin's mobility would be forever marred by neck injury. What was the neck injury? That was...
So at SummerSlam in 1997, and this is when Austin was rising up through the ranks. He was scheduled. He actually won the Intercontinental Championship, and again, wrestling is all predetermined. The outcomes are known by the competitors when they walk in. So he was being rewarded for all the work he put in for the 18 months he'd been with the company by being given the Intercontinental Championship. But he was having a match against Bret Hart's brother Owen Hart. And Owen Hart did a pile driver where basically you hold the other dude upside down and you simulate dropping him on his head. And Owen Hart was going to land in his butt. And Austin said, "You can't do that. That's really unsafe. Please land on your knees." And so Owen Hart ignored him, landed on his butt, and legitimately smashed Austin's head into the floor of the ring. It's often said that Austin's neck was broken. That's not really true. It compacted his spine and bruised 2 vertebrae, which is still a horrendous injury. Austin talks about how he's talked about since that when that happened, he couldn't feel anything and he thought his neck was broken and he'd been paralyzed. He said the first thing that went through his mind was Christopher Reeve. But he is able to get in, when you watch it, Owen Hart is clearly panicking internally but trying to keep it together, and he's pacing around for about a minute, and then Austin gets whatever strength he has left and does the weakest pin you've ever seen in your life. And the fact that he's able to move at all is astounding. And pins Owen Hart, gets the championship, but then has to drop it a couple of days later because of the neck injury. Jeez. And he's since acknowledged he should have gone and gotten surgery and recovered, but because he was on a roll with the audience, he didn't want to lose his momentum. And so before that, Austin had been known as being a really talented technical wrestler who could also brawl, but afterwards, because his spine was so messed up, he had to switch to brawling full time. And often throughout the Attitude Era, where he was one of the 2 main characters alongside The Rock, and any match that Austin was in would become no disqualification, so he could just punch, kick, hit the stunner, use weapons. They could be outside interference, just to hide for the fact that he couldn't actually do the same submission holds and grappling moves that he used to.
So that's sad. And at this point, though, it's before then,
yeah.
And it goes on to say that the this match we're about to see put together the right mixture of in-ring continuity with the violent brawling that would define the upcoming era. In the end, Bret had Austin where he wanted him and received his decisive victory, but Austin's defiance mixed with Bret's petty frustrations made it a question of who really came out on top. Austin became the hero WWF needed, or Bret Hart acquired a new coat of paint, and wrestling would never be the same. What do you think about that description of it?
I think it's pretty apt. So Austin, up to that point, had been working as a heel. He was an anti-authority rebel who picked fights with anyone he possibly could. Their feud had started in November of the previous year at Survivor Series. Bret Hart had taken some time off following WrestleMania. Mm-hmm. He had about 6 months off, had done some acting work and was reevaluating his future. Meanwhile, Austin's acting as a heel. There's a really infamous sequence called Pillman's Got a Gun, where he invades another wrestler's house and it looks as though the other guy shoots him.
What?
And that got complaints from media watchdogs and families going, this is going too far. But the more, and Austin was really potty-mouthed, he would swear on TV and they'd get complaints, but the more he did that, the more the audience loved him. He did a series of promos basically calling out Bret Hart, because Bret Hart is watching WWF Raw at the time, and he gets in the blood of McMahon and he goes, I want to work with this guy. And so there's a series of pre-filmed promos where Austin's calling out Hart, who at that point is a very stoic, very righteous, justice-filled babyface. They have a really good match at Survivor Series in November of 1996. And following that, for the next 5 or 6 months, Austin just tries to make Bret Hart's life absolute hell. He costs him title opportunities, and he ruins match outcomes, and he's constantly attacking him. And Bret Hart is just complaining about it constantly, and he's always whinging and saying there's no justice in the WWF, and everyone knows he's the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be, and there's no justice. And Austin's like, well, I'm not making any, I'm not pretending, I'm not whinging. If I get beaten, I'll just deal with it. So, because in real life, Bret Hart had basically been told, if you're a face, you get to work with these guys. If you're a heel, you get to work with these guys. And Hart goes, oh, well, I'm turning heel then.
Right.
So, as we get to the match at WrestleMania 13, basically it's very deliberately set up so that even though the crowd still loves Bret, because he is a babyface, the seeds have been planted for a heel turn, and even though the audience is encouraged to boo Austin because he's a heel, the seeds have been planted for a face turn. And they get out, and it's being now this is a notoriously bad WrestleMania. This is bottom 5 WrestleManias ever. The crowd in Chicago prior to Hart and Austin stepping out into the ring has been dead quiet. So Triple H is a really solid match with Goldust, but the audience doesn't care. There's a really unique tag team, heel versus heel, where you got Davey Boy Smith and I believe Owen Hart versus Mankind and Vader, 4 really popular performers, and just no one cares. They are completely silent. And then
just the chemistry wasn't
there. The story build wasn't there either. The matches are kind of just thrown together. But then you got to Austin versus Hart,
and this is a mid tier. This is halfway through.
Halfway through the show. It's the middle of the card. So this is in March. They've been building this up for about 5 months now. And the go home show, which is the last episode of Raw before this, Bret completely loses it after Austin costs him a match where he could have been challenging for the title. And basically,
so this one has strong story.
Yeah. So basically, Bret Hart could have won the title in a steel cage match on the previous Raw. Austin interferes, tries to help him win, but costs him the match. And Hart is fuming, and then then Austin says, "No, this is your fault. You screwed it up. We could have had a title match, but you screwed it up." Now, this is a submission match that they're having. So there's no title on the line. It's purely the blow-off.
This one we're about to see in WrestleMania.
Yeah. Purely, it's all about the story, not about a title. And it's a submission match. It's no disqualification. Anything goes. Pinfalls do not count.
Right. So this is why, and again, what we'll listen to here is just the 2 minutes of them going out of the ring. So at this point...
Yes. Now, this is something really brilliant that they do. And this became a cliche a year or so later. But what they do is they actually, because it's a brawl. It's not a proper wrestling match. It is a fight. They go through the crowd, and the crowd that has been dead the entire time suddenly wakes up. They're asking for high fives. They're mugging for the camera. And they're into it because Austin and Hart do such a good job re-energizing them. There's a guy wearing an NWO shirt from WCW, the main rivals. They also had Ken Shamrock, who was a UFC fighter. He was the guest referee for this, so he brings a lot of legitimacy. And I recently listened to Stone Cold's podcast where he talks about how good Shamrock was.
Really?
Yeah, because he basically did a watch along where he goes, "Sing it up, this time signature, and we can launch it together. Look at Ken Shamrock, little positioning."
Wow, so he's also helping. This is a really hairy moment. They're in the crowd. They're way down in the crowd as well, it seems.
Yeah,
and a lot of the crowd are kind of patting them, patting heads and shoulders.
And it's worth noting, wrestlers have been stabbed by crowd members before.
No.
Rowdy Roddy Piper, one of the most despised heels ever, if he was working heel, he got stabbed 3 times. So
really?
Going in the crowd, it's risky. But essentially, They're re-energizing the crowd before they get back in the ring. The entrance is so good as well because Austin's theme song starts with glass breaking. So there's a pane of glass with a skull on it that drops and shatters as he walks through it, and then Bret storms in, stomps over the glass. Very symbolic.
And you can hear that crowd now.
Yeah, but basically, and they are just trying to hurt it. In story, they're trying to hurt each other. In real life, these guys trusted each other a lot. They are they're really good friends. Look at that. Look at just the strength that Bret throws himself into those steps.
Right.
But there's a very famous moment near the end where, if you're unfamiliar with blading is where wrestlers will hide little razor blades on their person. They'll cut their foreheads open in the middle of the match and start bleeding to make it more dramatic. Hart said to Austin, you've got to get color. You've got to blade during this match to make it more dramatic. And Austin was like, I don't want to do this. He goes, I'll blade you. So there's a bit near the end where Hart, apparently he hid the blade in his mouth. I don't know how he did that. It's not a full razor blade. It's like a little bit of it. There's a bit where you can clearly see he sort of like slaps Austin in the forehead, and that's where he blades him. And it's a good cut. And
so why would Austin be comfortable with someone else bleeding him?
Because Bret Hart he was known for being really professional,
Okay.
and these guys are friends. And Bret Hart had basically said to him before the match, "This match is going to make you a star, so just trust me on this one." And he'd basically been like, the entire program they've worked together really well, and they just trust each other because they're performers. Ultimately, it's not a real fight, but they're trying to make it seem like it is, and they just work well together. And after the blood starts pouring out of Austin's head, and there's a brilliant moment because Bret tries a submission move. Austin counters out of it, and he absolutely goes down on him. He wraps cable around Bret's neck and tries to choke him out. Bret clocks him in the head with the ring bell, and then there's this really famous moment where Bret locks Austin in his submission move called the sharpshooter, which apparently, according to Mick Foley, it's a legitimately painful submission move because it places pressure on the quadriceps. And you see Austin gets locked into it. He can't get out. He's screaming in pain, and there is blood pouring down his face. It's one of the most iconic moments in wrestling ever. And he almost fights out of it, but then Bret shoves him down, locks it back in. And the really important part is that Austin refuses to submit. It's a submission match, and he no matter how much pain he's in, he will not submit. And eventually he passes out in a pool of his own blood. Ken Shamrock yells at him, Steve, if you don't respond, I'm going to end the match. Right. He doesn't respond, so the match ends. Bret Hart wins, even though Stone Cold didn't tap. And that's important for the story because it sets him up as the toughest SOB because he was in this really painful move and he did not tap out. And then after the match is finished, that's where the double turn happens because there's a moment where everyone's cheering Bret. All Bret has to do is go backstage. I'm actually quoting wrestling bios here. All Bret's got to do is walk backstage. But he's just like so overcome with all this emotion and all this resentment that he literally starts kicking Austin while he's down. Shamrock grabs him off him. He hits a suplex and full on squares up. Shamrock is baiting Bret into a fight, going, if you're going to fight this guy, fight me instead. And the crowd's into it. But then Bret walks away and they all start booing him because he's literally kicked a man while he was down. And then he's walked away from a confrontation and people are booing him all the way up the ramp.
Really?
And this was very much by design because Bret later, because the very next night on Raw, he starts a villainous faction, an anti-villainous faction called the New Hart Foundation with his brother Owen, his brothers-in-law Davey Boy Smith and Jim the Anvil Neidhart, and they're heels in America, but because they're very anti-American, but they are faces everywhere else, and so they're basically family values oriented, but they all think that America is awful and immoral. And he became the top heel of the company as a result of that turn.
Heel, right?
And then Austin wakes up. A referee comes over to help him up, and then he hits his finishing move on the ref, the stunner, and he's got a dinged up knee. He does a terrific job selling an injured knee all throughout the match, where Bret stomps on it. And as he refuses help, goes back out the ramp by himself, and as he's staggering back, he looks at the audience, and they're all going, "Oh, Stan!" Oh, they break out in a crouch, and that's where the face turn happens. So they don't actually change anything about the characters. Austin is still a wild card, but now the audience loves him because he refused to tap out to the most painful move, and he didn't ask for anyone's help.
Right, and they got set up right at the end after the match had finished.
Yes.
And again, that idea of the storytelling of the wrestling. That's
exactly, yeah. Bret Hart in particular is one of the best storytellers in the ring ever.
Fascinating.
Because we looked at one of his matches earlier against Roddy Piper.
Right, yes.
Where they sort of tease the Roddy Piper heel turn because he realizes that he can't beat Bret fairly, so he resorts to cheating, and he almost does it, but then he hears the crowd booing him, and so he decides to lose with grace rather than... But yeah, that's...
And this going into the audience at that stage was one of the remarkable things about that match. I think you were mentioning before we were talking about this match that then sadly just became a little overused.
It became a real cliche, especially The Rock. The Rock abused it a lot, where basically it's at a certain point they leave the ring, and it's hard for the people in attendance because I've seen I've been at an event that had wrestling at it. It was a Lady Beard concert where he goes and he wrestles through the crowd, and you can't see anything. You can't see anything,
Right.
and it's just it's frustrating. It
Sorry,
gets
so
frustrating.
get back to that. So that was Lady Beard, the pop. Heavy metal, kind of
idol dancer, cross-dresser
in Japan, and you know, kind of popular around the world for a period. Was involved in a wrestling match.
Yeah, he started out as a pro wrestler and a stuntman before he got into heavy metal and idol dancing. So he always, every time he goes, he does something. He'll fight a local wrestler. And
What was the context that you saw a match?
It was at
by Lady Beard.
It was at AvCon in Adelaide.
In Adelaide, really?
Yeah.
So Adelaide, where would they get a wrestling ring? Like there was a proper wrestling ring.
It wasn't a ring, so it was basically
boxing...
they have a match on stage, on the idol stage, and then they brawl,
on the stage,
and then they brawl through the crowd.
Right. So. So not all the moves would be there.
No.
But it would be performing aspects of wrestling. And there was a local Adelaide wrestler.
Yes. I can't remember who it was. But I mean, the ropes are the ropes are a massive part of wrestling. Like there are so many moves that they use the ropes for. Like they'll jump up and do elbow drops, they'll push the other guy into it, and it's called an Irish
and I guess,
whip.
As you were talking about, for the audience, they can see that as well, right? Even if you're kind of way back, or if you're on the kind of flat surface viewing, you'd be able to look up and see it. As you're saying, one of the things, while it will energize parts of the audience, which are there, if you're way over the other side of the ring, you're going to have obscured, if not no vision. And I guess maybe they'll have television screens that you start watching.
But so yeah, it was good for this because it re-energized the crowd after they'd been completely dead quiet, and they would go back to being dead quiet because Sid versus Taker is considered one of the worst main events ever in WrestleMania history. But
it was so bad in terms of the
slow plotting. No one really cared about the story. Well, if there even was a story, it's like. That was before Undertaker's WrestleMania streak had been established, but
because the article was talking about that many of the 15 top WrestleManias are not the draw card match, or not the number one match, but is that often the? Were you surprised at that? That the it's actually the kind of hidden gems that become recognized.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's reasonably rare for the main event to be the match of the night, because your main event it's done with your top talent who you want to protect. You don't want them to get injured, so they'll as a result do less risky maneuvers. I mean, Austin's neck injury led to what is called the main event style, where it's mostly punch and kick heavy and like safe moves like suplexes.
Because the main event is setting up like it's the payoff for all the work you've done in a way. Right, it's setting up your holding of the title. The moment you'll get all the hopefully more merchandising money and so forth, and like it'll be helping set up your nest egg. Because what was the one we saw? Was it Raw? When I was at
we watched SummerSlam,
right? Because the match I remember was the one with Logan Paul.
Yes,
which was middle, like it was still daytime. But it was a great match, and then he does that flip, that kind of Olympic diving level double flip or whatever, somersault flip.
The Asai moonsault that he does onto LA Knight, where he jumps off the top rope out of the ring, onto the concrete. It's so well done, and he actually said that he never wants to do that again because he practiced it religiously because it's such a dangerous move.
Oh, I could believe it. It was real amazing to watch, but very much kind of athlete at the top of his game, kind of like Olympic kind of guy.
WCW in the 90s was notorious for that because they'd have the cruiserweights who were, a lot of them were Mexican wrestlers from Lucha Libre, or they'd be Japanese-style wrestlers doing these incredible aerial maneuvers, and they'd have them on at the beginning. And then at the end, you'd have, guys like Hulk Hogan, Roddy Piper, and Randy Savage, who were
Just
still in good, they were past their physical prime, shall we say. And I mean, Piper in particular had a hip replacement, so he was never as mobile as he was in the 80s. But the thing about Austin versus Hart as well is that it's not usually WrestleManias where the feud finishes, but the feud doesn't finish there. Because after that, it still keeps going. Only one guy's gone from a bad guy to a good guy. The other one's gone from a good guy to a bad guy. And the original plan was for them to have a rematch at WrestleMania 14 for Austin to get the belt off Bret Hart in the main event. But because Bret Hart had left the company, that never happened. So the feud is terrific, but it doesn't have an ending. Yeah. Which I imagine that as an organizer is what you want, that lightning in a bottle moment from a match like this, and then milk it, and then when it doesn't eventuate, it must have been very frustrating to the across the board. I'll try and summarize this very quickly, because basically what happens is at the end of November, when Bret Hart was leaving, his last match was in Canada. He's Canadian, and he had the title at the time. And McMahon, the promoter, had been trying to get the belt off him for a very long time, or get him to drop it to Shawn Michaels, who Bret Hart had extreme problems with in real life. And so essentially what happens is they agreed that there'd be a disqualification. He'd forfeit the belt the following day on Raw, the weekly TV show. But what happens is that, and he'd been told by multiple people, do not let them get you in a submission hold, because there might be a double cross. And what happens?
Really?
Shawn Michaels gets Bret Hart in a submission hold. McMahon yells at the timekeeper to ring the bell. Even though Bret verbally doesn't submit, they ring the bell and they treat it as if he tapped out. And that's it's called the Montreal Screwjob, and it's one of the most notorious moments in wrestling history, where they literally screw the guy out of the title, and he's furious afterwards. But it's it cheats you out of that final payoff between Austin and Hart at Mania 14.
That might set us up for a future discussion when we get you back to talk about the worst wrestling matches from the best wrestlers. So this is another Den of Geek article where they talk about even the very best wrestlers have their bad nights. Here's a list of the worst from the sport's greatest superstars.
We can spend another 6 months talking about that article.
That's right. This will be setting us up. We'll milk this much like a storyline for wrestling.
And it can have a really damp squib of a finish because people will stop caring about it.
That's right. All right. So thanks for listening to Media Mothership. It's great to be back after the month. So wonderful to have you join the show almost in this new season, I guess. This new renewed season of Media Mothership. So listen in next week. We'll dive into more pop culture media theories. Thank you, Marcus, for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. And keep listening to Edge Radio. We'll have Adrian's show, You Can't Sit Down, happening at 7, at 6, between now and 6 o'clock. We'll just have some great tunes.
You're listening to...